When the captain collapsed mid-flight, 150 passengers thought they were doomed. But the quiet 15-year-old in seat 12A wasn't just any kid. She had a secret that could save them all. What happened next shocked the aviation world and changed everything we thought we knew about heroes. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. 15-year-old Emma Martinez sat in seat 12A, staring out the small oval window at the endless carpet of white clouds below. Flight 392 from Seattle to Chicago was only half full on this ordinary Tuesday afternoon in March. Most passengers were typical business travelers hunched over their laptops typing emails, or exhausted tourists sleeping off their vacation fatigue. Emma was traveling alone, something she had done many times before, though this trip felt different somehow. To the experienced flight attendants and other passengers glancing her way, she looked like any typical American teenager. She wore comfortable faded blue jeans, well-worn white sneakers with cartoon characters on them, and a navy blue hoodie featuring her high school's Eagle mascot logo. Her long dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail secured with a bright yellow scrunchie. She had white earbuds in, supposedly listening to the latest pop music that kids her age enjoyed, though she was actually paying careful attention to everything happening around her on the aircraft. Emma was remarkably quiet and polite when the friendly flight attendant named Sarah offered her a complimentary soft drink and bag of pretzels. She said please and thank you in a soft, respectful voice that her parents had taught her to use. When the elderly gentleman sitting next to her in seat 12B struggled to lift his heavy carry-on bag into the overhead storage compartment, she immediately stood up to help him without being asked. To everyone observing her behavior, she seemed like a nice, well-behaved teenager on her way to visit distant relatives or maybe heading back to boarding school after spring break. But Emma Martinez was extraordinarily far from ordinary, though she had become expert at hiding her exceptional abilities. What absolutely nobody on that commercial aircraft knew was that this quiet, unassuming teenager sitting in the economy section had accumulated more actual flight experience than most of the crew members working in the cockpit and cabin. She had been actively flying various types of aircraft since she was barely 12 years old, not just riding along as a passenger, actually piloting aircraft as the person in control. Emma came from a distinguished family of professional aviators spanning 3 generations. Her father, Colonel Miguel Martinez, was a decorated retired Air Force pilot who had flown fighter jets during 2 overseas conflicts before transitioning to flying commercial airliners for American Airlines. Her mother, Dr. Carmen Martinez, had been a certified flight instructor and aerobatics champion before becoming an air traffic controller at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Her older brother, Carlos, was currently in his 2nd year of intensive pilot training with the U.S. Navy, following in their father's military footsteps. Flying high-performance aircraft wasn't just the family business. It was literally encoded in their DNA. But Emma was genuinely special, even among her aviation-obsessed family members. She possessed what experienced pilots called the touch, an intuitive, almost mystical understanding of aircraft behavior that simply couldn't be taught in any classroom or simulator. By age 13, she could smoothly land a Cessna 172 in treacherous crosswinds that made seasoned pilots with thousands of hours break out in nervous sweats. At 14, she had successfully soloed in 6 completely different types of aircraft, from tiny 2-seat trainers to complex twin-engine machines. She understood fundamental principles of flight dynamics, meteorology, navigation systems, and emergency procedures better than many commercial pilots with decades of professional experience. Her parents had been extremely careful to keep Emma's remarkable flying activities as quiet as possible. Child prodigies in aviation attracted unwanted media attention, government scrutiny, and legal complications. The Federal Aviation Administration maintained strict regulations about minimum ages for various pilot certifications and ratings. Officially, Emma was just another aviation-enthusiastic teenager who enjoyed flying as a passenger with her pilot family members. Unofficially, she was quite possibly one of the most naturally gifted pilots anyone in the aviation community had ever encountered. Emma had quietly accumulated well over 2,000 hours of actual flight experience, though most of it was in smaller general aviation aircraft rather than large commercial jets. She had flown everything from tiny single-engine training planes to sophisticated multi-engine aircraft equipped with complex avionics systems. She thoroughly understood instrument flight procedures advanced navigation techniques, proper radio communication protocols, aircraft systems management, and most critically, how to maintain absolute composure during high-stress emergency situations. As Flight 392 cruised smoothly at exactly 35,000 feet above sea level, Emma wasn't actually listening to teenage pop music through her earbuds as other passengers assumed. Instead, she was carefully listening to the subtle sounds of the aircraft itself. The barely perceptible change in engine pitch that indicated they were beginning their initial descent phase toward Chicago. The faint hydraulic whining noise that meant the autopilot system was making small course corrections to stay precisely on their assigned flight path. The almost imperceptible vibration patterns that told her experienced senses exactly how fast they were flying and whether the aircraft was operating within normal parameters. To her extensively trained ear, everything sounded completely normal and routine. The twin-engine Boeing 737 was running smoothly with all systems functioning properly. The flight crew up front was clearly professional and competent, based on their standard announcements and the aircraft's stable flight characteristics. This should have been nothing more than another boring, routine commercial flight to Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Emma had absolutely no way of knowing that in exactly 37 minutes, everything about this peaceful flight would change dramatically and forever. The experienced captain would suddenly collapse from a severe medical emergency. The young co-pilot would panic under the overwhelming pressure, and the quiet, unassuming teenager sitting in seat 12A would become the only person aboard Flight 392 with the knowledge, skills, and nerves necessary to save all 150 lives depending on her. Captain Robert Hayes was experiencing an increasingly uncomfortable sensation in his chest area. He was a highly experienced professional pilot with over 15,000 meticulously logged flight hours accumulated during his 23-year career, but something definitely wasn't right with his physical condition today. They were just beginning their standard descent procedures toward Chicago O'Hare when a sharp, stabbing pain suddenly shot through the left side of his chest like a lightning bolt. "Tom," he said quietly to his co-pilot. First Officer Tom Bradley, trying not to alarm anyone while reaching up to loosen his uniform tie. "I'm not feeling particularly well right now." Tom immediately looked over with growing concern etched across his face. Captain Hayes appeared unusually pale and was beginning to perspire heavily despite the cool temperature maintained in the aircraft's cockpit. "What's wrong, Bob? What kind of symptoms are you experiencing?" "Severe chest pain. It's getting progressively worse by the minute." Captain Hayes attempted to reach for his water bottle to take a sip, but his normally steady hand was trembling noticeably, and he seemed to be having difficulty with basic coordination. Tom immediately assumed control of the aircraft's flight systems without being asked. "Bob, you need to try to relax and breathe normally. Let me handle the approach procedures and radio communications while you focus on feeling better." But before Tom could contact air traffic control to request medical assistance or declare any kind of emergency, Captain Hayes suddenly collapsed completely. His entire body went limp like a rag doll, and he slumped forward against his safety harness system. His eyes were closed, he was completely unconscious, and he wasn't responding to any verbal commands or gentle shaking. "Oh my God," Tom whispered in absolute shock and disbelief. In his relatively brief 3 years working as a commercial airline co-pilot, he had never once faced anything remotely approaching this level of emergency. He possessed less than 1/200 total flight hours in his logbook, and had never attempted to land any aircraft without an experienced captain actively supervising and guiding his every decision. The massive Boeing 737 was currently carrying exactly 150 passengers and 6 crew members. They were cruising at 25,000 feet altitude, approximately 40 nautical miles from Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Tom understood intellectually that he needed to immediately declare a medical emergency and request priority landing clearance, but he was simultaneously fighting his own rapidly rising panic and overwhelming sense of responsibility. "Chicago Approach Control, this is United Airlines Flight 392, Tom said into his radio microphone, his voice noticeably shaking despite his attempts to maintain professional composure. "We have a serious medical emergency situation. The captain has suddenly lost consciousness and is unresponsive. Requesting immediate priority landing clearance. United 392 Chicago Approach. We copy your medical emergency report. Are you able to continue your approach and landing procedures with current crew?" Tom looked desperately at the unconscious captain slumped beside him, then at the bewildering array of complex instrument panels, switches, and controls surrounding him in the cockpit. He had received extensive training for exactly this type of scenario during his initial certification. But classroom training felt completely different from the terrifying reality of being solely responsible for 156 lives. Chicago approach, I believe I can handle it. I'm the first officer with limited experience in single-pilot operations. This is my first time attempting to land without captain supervision. United 392. We understand your situation completely. We're immediately clearing all other traffic from your vicinity. You have absolute priority for runway 10 right. Emergency medical personnel and firefighting equipment will be positioned and ready. But as Tom attempted to continue the complex approach procedures, serious problems began multiplying rapidly. His nervousness was causing him to make small but potentially dangerous errors in judgment. His airspeed readings were fluctuating wildly between too fast and too slow. His altitude control was drifting unpredictably. The normally smooth and controlled approach was becoming increasingly unstable and dangerous. Down in the main passenger cabin, people were beginning to notice that something unusual was happening. The experienced flight attendants appeared worried and were quietly conferring among themselves. The aircraft's movements weren't as smooth and controlled as passengers expected during a normal descent. Emma felt the subtle but significant changes immediately with her highly trained senses. The aircraft was descending too rapidly, then suddenly leveling off, then descending again at an inconsistent rate. The turns weren't properly coordinated, causing uncomfortable sensations for passengers. Someone in the cockpit was clearly struggling with basic aircraft control, and the situation was deteriorating. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up calmly but purposefully. Sarah, the senior flight attendant, noticed her movement immediately and approached with concern. "Honey, you really need to stay seated with your seatbelt fastened. We're experiencing some minor technical difficulties, but everything is going to be perfectly fine." Emma looked directly at Sarah with eyes that seemed remarkably mature and experienced for someone only 15 years old. "What specific kind of technical difficulties are you referring to?" "Just some minor operational issues that the pilots are handling. Please return to your seat immediately." But Emma could clearly hear the underlying stress and worry in Sarah's carefully controlled voice. She could feel the aircraft's increasingly erratic and unprofessional movements through the cabin floor and walls. Her extensive pilot training and finely tuned instincts told her this situation was far more serious than minor technical difficulties. "Is there a significant problem with the flight crew?" Emma asked with calm directness that surprised Sarah. Sarah hesitated for several seconds, clearly uncertain about how much information to share. "The captain isn't feeling well currently. The co-pilot is handling all flight operations." Emma's heart immediately sank with understanding and fear. A single pilot approach and landing in a large commercial airliner was extremely difficult and dangerous, even for highly experienced pilots with thousands of hours. If the co-pilot was relatively inexperienced or panicking under pressure, every person aboard this aircraft could be in mortal danger. "I need to speak with the co-pilot immediately," Emma said with quiet but unmistakable authority. "Sweetie, that's absolutely not possible. You need to return to your seat right now and—" "My name is Emma Martinez. My father is Colonel Miguel Martinez, United States Air Force retired, currently employed as a captain with American Airlines. I have extensive flight experience and training. If your co-pilot needs assistance, I might be able to provide valuable help." Sarah stared at this teenager in complete amazement. Emma was speaking with the confidence, knowledge, and professional bearing of an experienced pilot rather than a typical high school student. "You're just a kid," Sarah said weakly. "I'm a kid who knows how to fly aircraft," Emma replied with calm certainty. "And if we don't get proper help in that cockpit very soon, we're all going to be in extremely serious trouble." Sarah made what would prove to be the most important decision of her career and possibly her entire life. Despite every regulation, protocol, and training manual telling her not to allow any passenger near the cockpit during an emergency, she led Emma toward the front of the aircraft. They walked past increasingly confused and worried passengers who couldn't understand why a teenager was being escorted to the restricted flight deck area. When they reached the reinforced cockpit door, Sarah knocked firmly but respectfully. "Tom, I have someone here who claims she can provide assistance with the current situation." The cockpit door opened immediately, and Tom looked out with desperation clearly visible on his sweat-covered face. He was breathing heavily and appeared completely overwhelmed by the responsibility suddenly thrust upon him. When he saw Emma standing there calmly, his expression showed confusion mixed with disbelief. "What is this? I don't have time for passengers right now. I'm dealing with a serious emergency situation and—" "Sir," Emma interrupted politely but firmly, "my name is Emma Martinez. I'm a licensed pilot with over 2,000 hours of actual flight time in various aircraft types. I can assist you with approach and landing procedures if needed." Tom stared at her in complete disbelief. "You're just a kid. You can't possibly be a licensed pilot. The minimum age for private pilot certification is 17 years old. How long have you been flying professionally?" Emma asked directly, ignoring his question about her age. 3 years total? But I don't see how that's relevant. How many single-pilot approaches have you successfully completed in a Boeing 737? Tom's face immediately went pale as he realized the implications of her question. "None. This is my first time attempting to land without captain supervision." Emma stepped confidently into the cramped cockpit space and immediately began assessing the critical situation with trained eyes. Captain Hayes was unconscious but still breathing regularly, which was encouraging. The aircraft was currently at 18,000 feet altitude, approximately 20 nautical miles from Chicago O'Hare Airport. The approach was dangerously unstable, with airspeed fluctuating wildly and altitude control becoming increasingly erratic. "Your current airspeed is significantly too high for this phase of the approach," Emma observed, quickly scanning the instrument panel. "You're also descending much too rapidly. At this rate, you'll overshoot the assigned runway completely." Tom looked at the various controls and gauges, suddenly realizing she was absolutely correct. "I don't know what to do anymore. I'm losing control of the situation." "Move to the right seat," Emma said with calm authority. "Let me help stabilize this approach." Tom hesitated for several crucial seconds. Everything in his professional training and airline regulations explicitly forbade allowing any unauthorized person, especially a minor, to operate aircraft controls. But everything in his gut instinct told him they were rapidly approaching a catastrophic situation that was beyond his current abilities to handle safely. Emma didn't wait for his permission or approval. She smoothly slid into the captain's seat and immediately took control of the aircraft with movements that were fluid, confident, and obviously well-practiced. Her hands moved over the complex controls with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed these actions thousands of times before. "What are you doing?" Tom asked, simultaneously amazed and terrified by what he was witnessing. "Saving everyone's lives," Emma replied with complete calm, immediately reducing engine power, adjusting the descent rate, and correcting their course alignment toward the proper runway approach path. The difference in aircraft handling was immediate and dramatic. The erratic movements and unstable flight characteristics disappeared instantly. The approach became smooth, controlled, and professionally executed. The aircraft responded to Emma's inputs like it was an extension of her own body. Tom watched in absolute amazement as this 15-year-old girl operated the sophisticated Boeing 737 with more skill, confidence, and precision than he had ever seen from any pilot. Her hands were completely steady, her voice remained calm and controlled, and every decision she made was exactly correct. "Chicago Approach Control, this is United Airlines Flight 392. Emma said into the radio microphone using proper professional phraseology. "We now have experienced pilot assistance. Requesting vectors for ILS approach to runway 10 right. United 392, turn left heading 090, descend and maintain 8,000 feet, came the immediate response from air traffic control. Left turn to heading 090, descending to 8,000 feet. United 392, Emma responded with perfect radio discipline. Tom was absolutely stunned by how professional and competent she sounded. She was using correct phraseology, proper procedures, and flying the aircraft like a seasoned airline captain with decades of experience. "How are you possibly doing this?" Tom asked in wonder. "Where did you learn to fly like this?" "Years of intensive practice and training," Emma replied while concentrating on configuring the aircraft for the approach. "My entire family has been involved in aviation for generations. I've been in cockpits since I could walk." She began systematically configuring the aircraft for landing, extending wing flaps to the appropriate setting, lowering the landing gear, adjusting engine power settings, and fine-tuning the flight controls. Every action was performed smoothly, precisely, and in exactly the correct sequence. United 392, contact Chicago Tower on frequency 120.1 for landing clearance, the approach controller instructed. Chicago Tower 120.1. Good day, Emma responded professionally. Switching radio frequencies with practiced ease. Chicago Tower. United 392 is an emergency aircraft on final approach for runway 10 right. United 392. You are cleared to land runway 10 right. Wind is 090 degrees at 12 knots. Emergency equipment is in position and ready. Emma aligned the aircraft perfectly with the runway center line. The approach was completely stabilized. Proper airspeed, correct glide path, perfect alignment. Tom couldn't believe what he was witnessing from someone so young. As they descended toward the runway, Emma's concentration was complete. She had flown many approaches before, but never in an aircraft this large, never with this many lives depending on her. The Boeing 737 was much heavier and more complex than the smaller planes she was used to flying. But the basic principles were the same. Feel the aircraft, respond to its needs, make small corrections rather than large ones. Looking good, Tom said, monitoring the instruments. Speed is perfect, glide path is perfect. Emma made tiny adjustments with the controls. A little left rudder to stay centered on the runway. A slight power reduction as they crossed the threshold. The passengers could see the ground rushing up to meet them. Some were praying, others were gripping their armrests. They had no idea that their lives were in the hands of a 15-year-old girl. At exactly the right moment, Emma pulled back slightly on the controls, raising the nose just enough. The main landing gear touched down smoothly. Then the nose gear settled gently onto the runway. Beautiful landing, Tom exclaimed. Emma deployed the thrust reversers and applied the brakes, bringing the big aircraft to a smooth stop. They were safely on the ground. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chicago, Emma announced over the intercom, her voice steady and professional. Please remain seated while we taxi to the gate. As they taxied toward the terminal, emergency vehicles followed them. Paramedics were standing by to help Captain Hayes, who was beginning to regain consciousness. United 392, contact ground control 121.9 for taxi, the tower controller said. Ground 121.9, United 392, Emma responded. When they reached the gate, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. A teenager had just successfully landed a commercial airliner, saving 150 lives. Captain Hayes was conscious but weak as paramedics checked him. He had suffered a mild heart attack but would recover fully. As passengers began to deplane, word spread quickly about what had happened. The quiet teenager in seat 12A had somehow ended up in the cockpit and landed the plane. How did you know how to do that? One passenger asked Emma as she left the aircraft. I've been flying since I was 12, Emma replied simply. But you're just a kid. Emma smiled. Kids can do amazing things when they have to. Within hours, Emma's story was international news. The FAA launched an immediate investigation into how a 15-year-old had ended up flying a commercial airliner. Airport security reviewed every second of video footage. The airline demanded a full explanation. Emma found herself in a conference room at O'Hare Airport, surrounded by officials from the FAA, the airline, and airport security. Her parents had been contacted and were flying in from Seattle. Miss Martinez, said FAA Inspector Johnson, can you explain how you knew how to fly a Boeing 737? Emma sat calmly in her chair. I've been flying different aircraft since I was 12. My father taught me. My family owns several planes. But you don't have a commercial pilot license. You're not even old enough for a private pilot license. That's correct, but I do have flight experience. Inspector Johnson pulled out a thick file. We've been investigating your background. Your father is indeed a pilot. Your mother is an air traffic controller. Your brother is in Navy flight training. Yes, sir. We also found records of flight instruction at various airports around Seattle. Instructors remember you. They all said the same thing. You're one of the most naturally gifted pilots they've ever seen. Emma didn't respond. She had always known her flying would eventually attract attention. The question is, Inspector Johnson continued, what do we do now? Technically, what you did was illegal. Operating an aircraft without proper certification carries serious penalties. But she saved 150 lives, said Tom Bradley, who had been called in to give his statement. Without her help, I don't think I could have made that landing. Captain Hayes, released from the hospital after being treated for his mild heart attack, had also come to the meeting. I've reviewed the cockpit voice recordings, he said. Emma's performance was flawless. She flew that approach better than many pilots with thousands of hours of experience. That may be true, Inspector Johnson said, but we can't ignore the fact that an unlicensed miner operated a commercial aircraft. Emma finally spoke. Sir, I understand the rules were broken, but when someone's life is in danger, sometimes you have to do what's right instead of what's legal. The room fell silent. What would you have done? Emma continued. Let Tom struggle alone? Let 150 people die because I didn't have the right piece of paper? Inspector Johnson studied her for a long moment. Ms. Martinez, your actions raise serious questions about our current licensing system. You clearly have the skills to operate complex aircraft safely, but our regulations exist for good reasons. I know that, sir, and I respect those regulations. I never intended to fly commercially. I was just trying to help in an emergency. Emma's parents arrived that evening. Colonel Martinez was proud but concerned about the legal implications. Mrs. Martinez was amazed that her daughter had handled such pressure so calmly. Emma, her father said, what you did was incredible, but it's also going to change everything for you. What do you mean? You can't go back to being just another teenager. The whole world knows who you are now. The story of Emma Martinez became a global sensation. News organizations called her the teen hero pilot. Aviation experts debated whether current age restrictions for pilot licenses made sense. The FAA faced pressure to review their regulations. Emma received hundreds of letters from people around the world. Children wrote to tell her she was their hero. Pilots wrote to praise her skills. Aviation colleges offered her scholarships, but Emma tried to stay focused on being a normal teenager. She returned to school in Seattle, though nothing felt normal anymore. Reporters followed her. Classmates treated her like a celebrity. Teachers didn't know how to act around someone who had become famous. I just want things to go back to the way they were, Emma told her parents one evening. They can't, her mother replied gently. What you did was too important. Too many people know about it now. 6 months after the incident, the FAA made an unprecedented decision. They created a special program for exceptional young pilots. Under strict supervision and with extensive testing, pilots under 18 could earn restricted licenses for emergency situations. Emma was the first participant in the program. She underwent months of intensive training and testing. She demonstrated her skills in flight simulators and actual aircraft. She studied emergency procedures, aircraft systems, and aviation law. The day she received her special license, Inspector Johnson presented it to her personally. Miss Martinez, he said, this license recognizes your exceptional abilities while maintaining safety standards. You're authorized to act as pilot in command in emergency situations only, under specific conditions. Emma accepted the license with mixed feelings. She was proud of the recognition, but she also felt the weight of responsibility. Thank you, sir. I hope I never have to use it. I hope so, too. But if another emergency arises, we'll all feel better knowing someone with your skills might be there to help. 2 years later, Emma was 17 and beginning to apply to colleges. Aviation schools competed to recruit her. She had offers from the Air Force Academy, Navy Academy, and top civilian flight training programs. But Emma had learned something important from her experience on Flight 392. Flying was about more than just technical skills. It was about helping people, making difficult decisions under pressure, and taking responsibility for others' lives. She chose to study both aviation and emergency medicine. Her goal was to become a flight doctor, providing medical care in remote areas where aircraft were the only way to reach people in need. I want to use flying to help people, she explained to a reporter on her 18th birthday. What happened on Flight 392 taught me that having skills means having responsibility to use them for good. The reporter asked if she ever regretted getting involved that day. Never, Emma said without hesitation. I was in the right place at the right time with the right skills. That's not a coincidence, and that's a responsibility. Tom Bradley, the co-pilot from Flight 392, had become a close friend. He visited Emma and her family regularly. crediting her with saving not just the passengers' lives, but his career and confidence as a pilot. She taught me that age doesn't matter when someone needs help, Tom said. What matters is having the courage to step up when you're needed. Captain Hayes made a full recovery and returned to flying. He often spoke about Emma at aviation safety conferences, using her story to illustrate the importance of staying calm under pressure. Emma Martinez showed us that heroes come in all ages, he would tell audiences. She also showed us that in aviation, your skills matter more than your experience level when lives are on the line. Emma graduated high school as valedictorian. In her graduation speech, she reflected on the lessons learned from her experience on Flight 392. 3 years ago, I was just a kid who loved flying, she said to the graduating class. One emergency changed everything. It taught me that we all have skills and talents that might seem ordinary to us, but could be extraordinary when someone needs help. Don't wait for permission to help others. Don't assume you're too young or too inexperienced to make a difference. When the moment comes, and it will come for all of us, trust your training, trust your instincts, and do what's right. The passengers on Flight 392 didn't care that I was 15 years old. They just needed someone who could land the plane safely. Whatever your skills are, someone somewhere needs them. Be ready. As Emma walked across the stage to receive her diploma, the entire audience stood and applauded. They weren't just celebrating her graduation. They were celebrating the young woman who had shown the world that heroes come in all ages. 5 years after Flight 392, Emma was a senior at the University of Washington, studying aerospace engineering and pre-med. She had earned her commercial pilot license and flight instructor rating. She worked part-time teaching flying to other young people, many of whom had been inspired by her story. The FAA's Young Pilot Emergency Response Program had grown to include over 200 specially trained young aviators across the country. 3 of them had been called upon to assist in actual emergencies, saving dozens of lives. Emma often received letters from young people who wanted to become pilots because of her example. She answered every letter personally, encouraging them to pursue their dreams while emphasizing the importance of safety and proper training. Flying is a privilege and a responsibility, she would write. If you choose this path, commit to being the best pilot you can be. Someone's life might depend on it. The Boeing 737 that Emma had landed safely that day was still in service. The airline had placed a small plaque near the cockpit door. This aircraft was safely landed during a medical emergency by Emma Martinez, age 15, on March 15th. Her courage and skill saved 150 lives. Emma rarely flew as a passenger on commercial airlines anymore. She preferred flying herself. But when she did, flight crews often recognized her name and would invite her to visit the cockpit. It's an honor to fly with you, even as a passenger, one captain told her. You've inspired a whole generation of pilots. As Emma looked toward her future, she remained focused on her goal of using aviation to help others. She had job offers from major airlines, aerospace companies, and the military, but her heart was set on flying medical missions to remote areas. I learned something important on Flight 392, she reflected in a recent interview. Being able to fly isn't just about getting from point A to point B, it's about being there when people need you most. I was just a kid on board that day. But sometimes being in the right place with the right skills is all it takes to change everything. I want to spend my life being in those right places, ready to help. The quiet teenager who had once sat in seat 12A had become a symbol of courage, competence, and the power of young people to make a difference. Her story continued to inspire aviators around the world, proving that heroes really do come in all ages. Emma Martinez had shown that sometimes, being just a kid is exactly what the world needs. Years later, when reporters asked her about that fateful day, Emma always gave the same answer. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just doing what my training taught me to do. When people need help, you help them. Age doesn't matter. Experience levels don't matter. What matters is being willing to step up when lives are on the line. Her father, Colonel Martinez, often spoke about Emma at aviation conferences around the world. My daughter taught me something that day, he would tell audiences. We spend so much time focusing on regulations, minimum ages, required hours, and certification requirements that we sometimes forget the most important thing. Competence and character matter more than numbers on a piece of paper. Emma's mother, Dr. Carmen Martinez had returned to flight instruction specifically to work with young pilots. Emma's experience showed us that exceptional young people with proper training can handle extraordinary situations. We need to nurture that talent, not suppress it with arbitrary age restrictions. The story of Flight 392 became a case study taught in aviation schools worldwide. It demonstrated the importance of recognizing talent regardless of age, the value of comprehensive emergency training, and the critical need for calm decision-making under extreme pressure. Emma herself had gone on to become exactly what she had dreamed of, a pilot who helped people. She flew medical missions to remote villages in Alaska, delivered supplies to disaster areas, and transported critically injured patients to hospitals. Every flight reinforced her belief that aviation was a tool for service, not just transportation. "People sometimes ask if I miss the excitement of that emergency landing," Emma said in her final interview before graduation. "The truth is, I don't miss the emergency part at all. What I treasure is the reminder that when we have skills and training, we have a responsibility to use them to help others. That's what real flying is about." On the 20th anniversary of Flight 392, the airline organized a reunion of all the passengers and crew members who had been aboard that day. Emma, now a successful aviation professional, attended with mixed emotions. Looking back, she told the assembled group, "I realized that day changed all of our lives, not just because of what happened, but because of what we learned about human potential. We learned that heroes come in all ages, that courage isn't about being fearless, and that sometimes the most unlikely person in the room might be exactly who you need." Tom Bradley, who had become a successful captain himself, introduced Emma to the crowd. "This woman saved our lives 20 years ago when she was just 15 years old. But more than that, she saved our faith in what people can accomplish when they're properly trained and willing to help others." As the evening concluded, Emma stood once again at the boarding gate where Flight 392 had originated 2 decades earlier. She thought about the quiet teenager who had boarded that plane with no idea that her life was about to change forever. Sometimes, she reflected, the most important journeys are the ones we never planned to take. Emma Martinez had indeed shown the world that being just a kid on board could be exactly what everyone needed.